Dorian Sky on YouTube. Police have issued a press conference about the Shellnut case. This is the lawyer who was attacked on New Year's Eve. They have captured one of their 3 suspects. They're looking for 2 more. And they held a lengthy press conference on the subject. And the questions from the press, I'm not sure who they were from, but the NYC is going to impose a minimum wage on app-based ride-sharing services in New York, which is going to bring the cost up. The Toronto Sun is calling the TTC upload to the province a bad idea. Mississauga cashier stopped a robbery using a banana. 2 men have been charged in liquor store thefts. A Torontonian has been charged with trying to join Daesh, as in ISIS, and he was turned in by a Turkish cab driver. Now did an article exposing Seton House and the situation there, and they also round up the best Black History Month events for us. An Ojibwe man was shot by police last week, and one of the officers who shot him has faced previous assault charges on civilians. The Order of Canada has inducted a whole bunch of Indigenous rights champions, and a new benefit event in, I think, Ottawa was held for Wet'suwet'en legal funds, and it's attended by singers and dancers, including some settlers in the performers. And APTN continues their audit of the child welfare system in Manitoba. The Venezuelan Air Force, one of their generals defected against the president. The dam collapse in Brazil was caused by deregulation. In BC, photos have been released of the suspect in the shooting of a transit officer. Adam Vaughan ends up saying, "Let's whack whack Doug Ford." Purdue Pharma is getting hit with a bunch of lawsuits for how it basically profiteered off of the opioid crisis. A Windsor man was involved in this insane car chase and was caught 18 charges for it. There's a massive explosion in Caledon Village. Like, one person's dead. This is on Sunday morning, so this is this morning. Everything else is about Saturday. The Auditor General of Canada, current Auditor General, has died of cancer after battling the illness for a long time. He died on Saturday. Both the US and Russia have abandoned the nuclear arms treaty that has been out there. And so we might face a future arms race, and there could be one already on, because both of them are accusing each other of breaking the treaty. That's why they both left. Apple's going to re-enable its group chat feature next week, and the person who notified them of it couldn't get them to respond for like a whole week. So those are the headlines, and just going to get a little more into some of them. So the Child and Family Services situation with the at least in Manitoba, which APTN is doing a whole bunch of investigation on two of their shows at least, APTN Investigates and APTN In Focus. And they've been interviewing insiders and researchers and advocates and stuff like child welfare advocates about the system, and they are basically exposing a conspiracy of profiteering and the commodification of children, which is it's, well, I'm not going to try and characterize the implications, but what they have reported on is that basically children it's kind of get reshuffled, and the problem is the removal of children, the apprehension, they call it, of children isn't one person they interviewed said that maybe 5% of the apprehensions were legit and were necessary. They apparently have a pattern of not considering family members who, like, they're more willing to consider foster parents than family members of the parent whose child is being apprehended. So there's all these cases of children who are being apprehended who have family, who have, secondary family, like aunts and uncles and grandparents and stuff like that, who can totally care for the kids, who want to, and who the kids like and everything like that. And they're shuffling them into foster care instead. And the thing is, they're not evaluating the foster care families to the same degree as they're evaluating the parents whose children are being removed by child welfare services. And some of the cases that they get into, which they say are not, they're not the freak accidents coming out of the system, but they're emblematic of they're good examples of the type of thing that happens. This type of thing includes like taking infants away from mothers, like police taking infants away from mothers right after giving birth, and spiriting them off. The privacy situation is kind of used as a veil to make everything impossible to investigate and to skirt transparency of any kind. So it's difficult to research what's happening within the system because nobody's allowed to talk about anything because everything's protected by the privacy rules. Just it's really worth watching, of course, the APTN interviews on this, but I do want to mention a few more of the pertinent facts. It's a $500 million a year industry in Manitoba, and by industry, what they're talking about is a $500 million of funding put forward for child protection. 90% of it is for child protection, and so the money that could be spent to prevent children from needing foster care in the first place is instead given to the foster parents and also spent on abducting and storing and rehousing the children. So it sort of becomes this situation of what I would call poverty entrapment, where parents who are super poor don't get the supports that they would need to, feed and clothe their children. And that situation is used as a pretext for removing the child, but then the foster care family does get those supports to feed and clothe the children. It's also used as just a way to funnel children away from poor families and into wealthier families. So it's basically instead of providing the poor families with the basic means of caring for their kids, in the context of a system where all of the social welfare systems put together don't bring families, zero income families, into the realm of being able to provide basic nutrition. So they're necessarily underclothed and malnourished and underhoused and stuff. So it's basically, it's almost like a child farm. Like, that's my editorialization of it, is it's kind of a child farm because we don't buy and sell children on some kind of open market as property or whatever in an official formal way. We basically recycle them. We upcycle super poor children instead of helping their families to provide for them. And apparently to the point of, it's like a recruitment scenario where the industry isn't agile, and it becomes an industry because it's a big sort of conglomeration of like contractors, but then also, of course, all the nonprofits who are working with it. But nonprofits, of course, are groups of people who have decided to figure out how to make jobs for themselves without making money for some company by doing something that is ostensibly good. So you can basically have a really good income that is paid for through funds that should probably just be going straight to the families, which is what basic income research has shown us, is if you just give them the money instead of employing somebody to give them bad advice, which is what social services largely consists of in Canada, is because the money is disappeared into their wages and everything like that. And of course, they deserve to be well paid. And at the same time, they are understaffed. And so they're overburdened with a crazy caseload. So they're ineffective whether they're trying to be ineffective or not, because those who are trying to help kids out can't be effective in that way. And those who are just trying to work the child farm are succeeding, but they are not. It's hard to look into the employee base and distinguish them from it's hard to investigate your employee base for those who are exploiting children, largely because even within the agency that, there's so much privacy issues. So if these allegations are true, it's a really intensely explosive report. I think I mentioned everything I want to. Part of the rate of recruitment is the average is one Manitoba baby, not just all the kids put together, but babies. One Manitoba baby is apprehended each day. And Manitoba is not an intensely populous province. So this is over 300 children, babies per year, who are secured by the state. And it's in crazy hospital police scenes where it's not crazy out of control moms flipping out all over the place who obviously can't. That's one of the problems that they're talking about, is that the apprehensions are really just it's hard to say it out loud, but it basically, to put it bluntly, they are removing kids from decent parents and giving them to terrible ones. apparently. And I hate to say it, but I believe all of this. I have no real trouble believing all of this, given how the settlers have treated our own kids and how we continue to treat our own kids. So in reviewing the Shellnut case with the press, this is this lawyer who was famous for defending cyclists who'd been hit by drivers, which is a tough case in Toronto because, like, you really have to, I don't know. Okay, so when the police got questioned about this press conference where they said all this amazing stuff, the first question was, and this is after the police lined up that, it's weird. It's like the first question was a victim blaming question, but it was about something that the cops had already made very clear. So the police make it super clear that the assailants who were driving by in their car had like instigated a verbal fight with this guy, and then he threw a garbage bag at their car, and then they beat him to within an inch of his life. And so the first question was, wasn't he basically the instigator by throwing the garbage? And so the police had to say, once again, well, they were, I don't know, saying something messed up to him first. And then the second question, there was additional sort of like victim blaming type of questions coming from the press. It was really, really nuts. The Toronto Sun covered it in an article and in video. So in New York, Uber is going to apparently have to pay a minimum wage to their drivers, and the reason that's going to make Uber suck as an app is not so much like, if you're an Uber driver and you're making less than minimum wage, then that's either you screwed up. You're supposed to be taking your fees and then paying yourself your minimum wage. And if you can't make minimum wage, then you as a business have to decide that you as an employee are not performing well enough, and you as your own boss have to fire yourself as an employee. And yes, that's utterly ridiculous, but it also works because it means each person for themselves gets to decide where to go to make okay money and where it's not going to work, and they get to figure it out. And that actually means that for the operators and for the customers and for the programmers, for everybody, basically, overall, it works better. It can work better. Basically because providing a minimum wage and the other things that we would associate with your labor rights results in is what has caused the taxi cab situation to be just ridiculous, where the whole road is spammed with taxi cabs in a lot of, downtown Toronto. A lot of the time you go downtown and the congestion is the taxis, and none of them are occupied, and they're all just driving around polluting and taking up space and parking, and they're in the way, and they're all making minimum wage. And they're there because they're making minimum wage, and they're between rushes, and they're just trying to scrape by. Uber people wouldn't do that. They would take a break, or they'd come back for a different shift because they'd be like, it's not going to be worth it. So Uber people end up learning what works and what doesn't by having one shift where they're making $35 an hour. and then another shift where they're making like $5 an hour. And every once in a while, you have one of those extreme days, but it's up to the operator to figure out what their own program is going to be. So the operators can't treat the app like an employer. And that's the difference between like Uber Eats and some of the other food delivery stuff. And that's the difference between Uber, ride sharing, and some of the other ride services. And so it's interesting. I'm not used to opposing the idea of a minimum wage. But as an Uber Eats delivery person, the other apps that provide that have that format, I wouldn't like them. And to me, they don't offer a better overall labor rights situation. They don't offer a better profit. And they don't offer as much control. That's the thing with Uber Eats. I get control over what I'm doing, and I get to figure out what's going to work. And that works because I'm smart. I don't know. I just insulted all the people who are not doing well on Uber by calling them dumb. But I don't mean to do that. But if you're successful at figuring that out, if you succeed at figuring that out because you're smart in that way, and being smart in that way works in that situation because the app's not oversaturated. Anyway, it's not as simple as so in Mississauga, apparently this cashier had somebody robbing their store and thwacked the robber over the head with a banana. I think it was probably a bunch of bananas because all the photos they showed were bunches of bananas, like, sealed together with a little bit of packing, logoed packing tape thing. So it's just a detail. So the Star is reporting this thing about two men who have been charged with a whole bunch of liquor store thefts. And so this is I guess we're going to figure out whether this crazy trend of liquor store thefts in Ontario is like how it's organized, whether it's, how concentrated it is among how big of a cohort of criminals and what their gangs are like, or how much of it is just random people doing a little thieving here and there. But apparently people are walking out with cases of it. So this Torontonian that got in trouble for the charges are leaving Canada to join a terrorist organization, in this case ISIS or ISIL or Daesh or Daesh or whatever, the caliphate assholes. So this guy, leading up to his departure for Turkey, people are like, yeah, he's really into this ISIS propaganda stuff. Oh, and now he's gone. And then, but it was in Turkey where this cab driver, he was probably like, hey man, I want to join ISIS. Like, I want to blow up Americans. Like, where's the thing? And the cab driver, and expecting the cab driver to be into it or whatever, because he doesn't know what Arabs are like. And then the cab driver rats him out. So is this Turkish cabbie who got us this Canadian who was going to join ISIS, and then tell them all about how to attack Toronto. So you got to check out the Now thing, the Now video and stuff of Seton House. If you've ever wondered what it's like inside one of the shelters that, that in Toronto, that politicians are always saying, they're open and available for anyone who needs shelter. And the press is always saying, well, people don't feel safe there. This is the article you've been waiting for, the video you've been waiting for, to finally show you that is totally the case. I think that's it. It's been a couple of really beautiful days here in Toronto. It's just been so fabulous after those terrible 2 days of hellish winter. But I hope everybody got just a preview, because that's like, we have to be ready for, we have to be ready for that action. So apparently this Windsor man went completely batshit crazy. Stole a car, crashed it into an SUV on the highway, stole another car, led police on this nutso chase, crashed the other car into a gas station. Like, that could have turned into an extreme tragedy, extreme, explosion or something. Just Google gas station explosion videos. Like, it's so bad what happens when things go wrong at gas stations. But they got him, and it's just insane. So the family that put together the family that profits off of or owns or whatever, Purdue Pharma, who makes like OxyContin or makes fentanyl or something, they basically sort of are like the drug lord kingpin masterminds behind apparently the opioid tragedy, the rise in like the overprescription of it, the under documentation of it. They really were there. The whole thing about not warning everybody about how habit forming it is, or marketing it as the less habit forming alternative. Really a lot like how like latex paint was marketed as safe because it was safer than oil paint. It wasn't marketed as safer. It was kind of marketed as safe, or it was received as if it was safe rather than just safer. And that's my interpretation of the charges against them. But apparently they got extremely dirty with it, like really interfering and like socially engineering a public health catastrophe so that they could profit off of it at so many different angles. So this City News reported on this explosion in Caledon Village, and it's just the latest in a lot of like big industrial explosions. I think it's an industrial explosion. The early report was very vague. No, it was at a house. It was in a neighborhood or something. Yeah. So when you hear about cutting red tape to get energy projects done, or to get industrial stuff done, red tape is the kind of thing that would have prevented the crazy dam collapse in Brazil that has now destroyed a whole bunch of places because it released a whole bunch of toxic waste that shouldn't have been stored there, of course. So deregulation led to the toxic waste being there. Deregulation led to apparently the dam collapse being totally unavoidable. And of course, criminal negligence leading to it, just the problem not being solved before the physical catastrophe occurred. And this is exactly the way that it happens here and everywhere else. The industrial angle, we are under industrial capture, and that's when industry takes over a state to get what it wants. The problem is Canada was created as a political entity for industry. So Canada was always meant to be, or at least always was, a industrially captured democracy with a market economy. So it's not that it's deeply embedded, it's kind of coming right from the roots. It's the intention. So in Canada, these kind of disasters are basically the plan. The places themselves are all disposable. And to me, this comes out of a weird interpretation of Christianity, which a lot of Canadians have, that the earth itself is disposable, and a weird interpretation of a lot of religions that kind of suggests that the earth is going to be gone soon anyway, or one way or the other, it's disposable, it's replaceable, or there's a billion others. And you'll be able to start group chatting next week. So this teenage kid discovered the flaw with Apple's FaceTime that allowed people to like kind of call somebody and hang up in a certain way or something, or call somebody and conference somebody in a way that your iPhone would pick up before you, like without you answering it. And then it would listen to you and play stuff over the speaker or not. So basically you could use it to just listen to somebody using their phone, kind of, as long as they didn't notice the call, I guess. But it was just a crazy bug. But the person who discovered it was this like teenage kid. And for a week, he tried to notify Apple and couldn't get them to notice what he was talking about. And this is really not surprising to me because I've never been able to get through to anybody about anything like this. And I have reported so much stuff like this. Some of it dangerous, you know, much of it illegal. And it is impossible to get a complaint dealt with. Or this is why in terms of software security and stuff like that, when people discover a vulnerability in some security software, like, okay, when somebody discovers a bug like this or a bug that could cause a big attack to happen, a big hack to go down, and they call it security vulnerabilities, what they often do is simply disclose it, which does offer anybody to exploit the hack, but it also forces it forces somebody, whoever's publishing the thing, to do something about it. So sometimes they'll notify the company whose software has the vulnerability and give them like 24 hours to deal with it. But because they're unwilling for only a few people to have that knowledge, it's called 0 day, when it's kind of like patient zero or whatever of a plague. It's where somebody knows about an exploit, but nobody's made an attack. Nobody's exploited it yet. So it's like if you found out about some security vulnerability that would allow somebody to blow up a nuclear facility remotely with a computer, and you were the only one that knew about it, you would be the 0 day. That would be the 0 day for that exploit. And so if you couldn't get in touch with the energy company and get them to patch it, if they wouldn't talk to you, then each day that you waited on releasing it online would be a day when anybody could hack it, and they wouldn't have already had the information for that time. So people end up just disclosing it, and then companies rush to fix it. But first they just take the whole thing offline. So this is a little bit like that. This kid had the 0 day, and Apple wouldn't listen to him, or it took them a week to listen to him. So he probably just should have disclosed it right away publicly. But it's an interesting conundrum to face if you're just some citizen who discovers some exploit. Do you publicize about it yourself? Do you go to the press about it so that they can pressure the company and prove it to investigate themselves and prove it to the company and pressure them, given that's going to take another 24 hours, during which time anybody could hack everybody? Because you don't know whether you're the 0 day or not. Nobody who discovers a 0 day exploit knows whether or not they were the first to discover it. So it's a situation that most civilians never have to face, but everybody has the slight chance to discover a glitch that could potentially be a huge security risk. Even in social situations, when I talk about highways being dangerous and stuff, and expressways being dangerous and being like a vulnerability, or I talk about how pipelines are a vulnerability in our infrastructure, that's the physical version of the same thing. That's, we have all of our infrastructure has it's 0 day, but unfortunately, it's the date that it was built. Anyway, bringing you the news and commentary on such. This is your host, Dorian Sky, reporting the daily news for Toronto for Saturday, February 2nd.